The first light of dawn filtered through the Appalachian pines, turning the mist into pale ribbons of gold. Frost jeweled the moss-covered stones, and a woodpecker drummed a slow rhythm somewhere deep in the forest. Margaret Ellison drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped from her cabin, the silence pressing close and familiar. At 65 she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had learned to make each motion count. The trail ahead smelled of wet earth and pine resin, a perfume she had come to trust more than any human company. Her life had long since narrowed to the steady circle of seasons. Once she had worn a wedding ring and known the music of a child's laughter. The fever that carried them both away left her in a world suddenly too large and too loud. Townsfolk had urged her back toward bustling streets and crowded parlors, but Margaret chose the woods, where judgment gave way to the slow patience of trees and streams. Years later, solitude was as much a part of her as the creases around her eyes. She told herself she no longer waited for anything. That morning, basket in hand, she followed the riverbank in search of wintergreen leaves and the last of the season's berries. A cold wind slid through the hemlocks, and she paused, sensing something beyond the normal murmur of water and wind. It began as a tremor in the air, a low, steady breath that was not her own. Then came the soft crack of a branch under weight far heavier than a deer. She turned slowly, heart hammering. Across the narrow stream stood a creature so large it bent the very scene around it, a massive silverback gorilla, black for silver to the shoulders, eyes dark as storm clouds. For an instant the forest shrank to the space between them. Margaret's fingers tightened around her walking stick. The animal neither lunged nor retreated. It regarded her with a stillness that unsettled her more than any show of teeth could have. The stories had drifted through nearby camps for years, a beast escaped from a traveling menagerie, a legend whispered by hunters around their fires. She had dismissed them as frontier fancy. Yet here he stood, muscles like knotted oak, chest rising in quiet rhythm, the morning mist curling around him as if he belonged to it. His gaze held no wild menace, only a strange, searching intelligence that made her throat tighten. She should have run. Instead she stood rooted, breathing the sharp scent of pine and cold river. The gorilla tilted his head, a slow, deliberate motion, as though weighing the shape of her fear. Margaret felt the years of loneliness gather like a tide behind her eyes. In that long silence she saw something mirrored back, an echo of her own isolation, an ache older than words. When the wind shifted, she reached into her basket and drew out a cluster of late-season berries. Her hand trembled as she extended it. The gorilla did not move closer, but a deep rumble, almost a purr, vibrated through the air. He lowered his gaze, then snapped a slender branch and laid it across a stone, a gesture that felt eerily like answer. A fragile thread of trust stretched between them, invisible yet unmistakable. Clouds rolled in by afternoon, turning the sky a pewter gray. The woods thickened with the smell of impending rain. Margaret kept walking, though every step away from him felt reluctant. By twilight the storm broke, sudden and violent, sheets of rain slicing through the trees. She sought shelter beneath a rocky overhang, pulling her shawl tight as thunder rolled like cannon fire. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw him again, a dark shape against the flashing sky. Then he was there, not as a vision but as solid presence. He stood at the edge of the ledge, rain streaming off his great shoulders, eyes reflecting the brief, silver light. He did not approach, only remained nearby, a silent sentinel against the night. The storm howled around them, but Margaret felt an unexpected calm, as if the forest itself had drawn a circle of safety. Hours passed in the drumming rain. When the wind finally eased, she stepped out, careful on the slick stones. The river below churned wild and white. She turned to thank the shadow that had kept her company, but he was already melting back into the trees, a whisper of movement swallowed by the mist. Morning brought a hard, crystalline brightness. Margaret followed the swollen stream, her thoughts restless. She told herself it had been chance, a fleeting brush with something untamed. Yet a quiet anticipation tugged at her, pulling her farther along the river's winding path. Birds darted through the newly washed sky, and somewhere a fox barked sharp and clear. It was near a narrow gorge that the world shifted again. The rocks here were slick with moss, the current loud and fast. She stepped carefully, basket balanced on her hip, but the stone beneath her foot gave way. She gasped as the ground tilted and the river surged upward. In an instant she was sliding, the cold roar of water filling her ears. She reached for a root, missed, and braced for the crush of icy current. A great shadow leapt across her vision. Powerful arms, warm and impossibly strong, wrapped around her torso. She felt the lift, the sudden steadiness as her body rose clear of the raging water. When her feet found solid earth again, she clung to the creature who held her, chest heaving, heart pounding like a drum. He set her gently on a bed of ferns, his dark eyes scanning her for hurt. Margaret's breath came in ragged bursts. She could smell the wild earth in his fur, the damp sweetness of rain. The massive hand that had saved her rested briefly on the ground beside her, palm broad as a dinner plate, fingers curved with a delicacy that stole her voice. For a long moment neither moved. The forest hummed around them, dripping leaves, the distant call of a hawk. Margaret met his gaze and felt the world narrow to that single point of connection. Fear ebbed, replaced by a wonder so deep it hurt. He had risked himself for her, a frail human stranger. No one had held her so carefully in decades. He rose with unhurried strength and stepped back, the morning light burnishing the silver in his coat. Margaret stayed seated, water dripping from her skirts, watching as he retreated into the green depths. He paused once, looking over his shoulder, and she thought she saw something like recognition, an unspoken understanding that what had begun between them could not be undone. When at last she gathered her basket and began the long walk home, the forest no longer felt like a lonely refuge. Every branch seemed alive with quiet promise. The cabin that once echoed with absence now waited in a different light. Margaret knew she had crossed an unseen threshold. Somewhere in the endless trees moved a being who had touched her life with a gentleness beyond words, and the emptiness she had carried for decades felt suddenly, irrevocably changed.